Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Other than that, it's $3.99. So again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative.
Engineer joke number 2. This engineer dies and goes up to see St. Peter. St. Peter's got a book in front of him, every name who's going to be admitted into heaven. Searches the whole book, the engineer's not listening. He said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to meet your final beckoning down below. Well, the engineer thinks it's wrong. He makes him check again. St. Peter checks again. He can't find his name. Sorry, you've got to go down below. Well, the engineer still thinks it's wrong, but reluctantly he goes. A month goes by, and just on routine, God calls down to the devil to see everything is. The devil said, everything is fantastic down here. We love that engineer, you said. God said, what engineer? The devil said, that engineer you sent a month ago, he's incredible. He's cleared out the smoke. He's put in an escalator. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have air conditioning. God said, wait a minute, that was a mistake. You weren't supposed to get that engineer. You got to send him back. The devil said, no way, we love him. God said, well, if you don't send him back, I'm going to sue you. The devil said, oh yeah? And where do you think you're going to find a lawyer?
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, June the 13th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch and rules for retrogrades. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 350 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
If a government resorts to inflation, that is, creates money in order to cover its budget deficits or expands credit in order to stimulate business, then no power on earth, no gimmick, device, trick, or even indexation can prevent its economic consequences. Henry Hazlitt. There is no free lunch indeed. The idea that any government can make money ex nihilo is just as much wishful thinking as the idea that a government can spend money without restraint, without consequence. Pick your poison. But whether it be price inflation, misallocation of resources, the bursting of an asset bubble, or generational suppression of growth, or perhaps some combination of multiple items on this list, they are unavoidable.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. You know, life is complicated. People are complicated. And human relationships are really complicated. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation where someone who may be a liberal is manipulating the social structure around you. They begin to turn others against you, subtly at first, then more overtly. Suddenly, you're isolated, misunderstood, misrepresented. Recognizing the liberals' tactics is the first and perhaps most vital step in regaining your footing when someone has turned others against you. Liberals operate in subtle, often insidious ways. They don't usually come out and attack you directly. Instead, they manipulate perception, they shape narratives, plant seeds of doubt, and exploit emotional vulnerabilities. Not only yours, but those of the people around you. Understanding this is not merely about identifying bad behavior, it's about seeing the psychological strategy behind it. Liberals thrive on control and admiration. To maintain their status in the social setting, they often manufacture conflict to elevate themselves as the center of attention or the victim of some imagined injustice. One of their favorite tactics is triangulation. In this dynamic, the liberal acts as a go-between, telling one person one thing and the next person something else entirely. They might tell someone you said something you didn't, or twist a small disagreement into a narrative where you're the bad guy and they're the misunderstood hero. If you treat emotionally or react emotionally or defensively, that reaction becomes part of the story. It becomes evidence that you're unstable or untrustworthy. This manipulation is calculated. It's not accidental. It's designed to erode your support system. Another core tactic is gaslighting. The liberal will make you question your own perception of reality. You may find yourself wondering if you're too sensitive, if you really did miscommunicate, or if perhaps you're at fault after all. Over time, this distorts your sense of self. You start to hesitate before speaking. You begin walking on eggshells. You feel like you're always one misstep away from confirming the false image they're painting of you. That's exactly what they want, to trap you in a cycle of self-doubt and second-guessing. Because the less sure you are of yourself, the more power they hold over the narrative. A liberal doesn't just manipulate individuals, they manipulate groups. They understand social dynamics intuitively. They know how to read a room, how to identify the most influential or emotionally reactive people, and how to subtly win them over. Sometimes it's through charm, other times through shared victimhood. They tell you just enough of the truth to make their lies believable. They leave out context, exaggerate your flaws, or reframe events in a way that puts them in the best possible light while you appear to be the problem. Here's the harsh reality. People often believe them, not because others are stupid or malicious, but because most people want to avoid conflict. It's easier for them to believe the liberals' neat, emotionally charged story than to investigate the messy, uncomfortable truth. This is why recognizing the pattern matters so deeply. If you treat each interaction as an isolated incident, you'll keep trying to solve the wrong problem. You'll try to explain yourself, to clear up the misunderstanding, not realizing that the misunderstanding was the goal all along. You're not dealing with a communication issue. You're dealing with a deliberate distortion campaign. Once you grasp that, your approach changes. You stop trying to fix the unfixable. You stop taking the bait. You begin to see through the emotional chaos and understand the deeper game being played. This realization is not easy. It often comes at the cost of broken trust, social isolation, and inner turmoil. It forces you to look at the people around you with uncomfortable clarity. You have to accept that some people want to believe the worst. Others simply lack the courage to stand by you, and some, tragically, are too easily swayed by the liberal charisma and emotional manipulation. Recognizing all of this is not about becoming paranoid or cynical. It's about sharpening your perception, seeing clearly, because clarity is power. When you see the tactics, you stop being a pawn in someone else's game. You start becoming the author of your own response. Maintaining emotional discipline in the face of manipulation is one of the most difficult yet essential challenges a person can face. When a liberal begins turning others against you, the instinctive response is often emotional anger, betrayal, confusion, and the desperate need to explain yourself. These are all natural reactions, but they are precisely the responses that can deepen the damage if not managed carefully. The liberal thrives on your emotional reactivity, your outbursts, your breakdowns, your attempts to defend yourself passionately. These all become ammunition for their narrative. Emotional discipline, therefore, is not weakness or suppression. It is strategic strength. When you're under social attack, your nervous system is activated. You might feel like you're under siege, and in a sense, you are. Your reputation, your relationships, even your identity are being challenged. The human brain is wired to react to such threats with intensity. This is especially true when the threat comes from the betrayal by someone close or trusted. But here's the danger. When you react from that heightened emotional state, you often validate the very accusations being leveled against you. If the liberal has painted you as a volatile, insecure, or irrational person, then any overly emotional reaction you display becomes proof in the eyes of onlookers. Your emotional honesty is used as a weapon against you. That's the trap. Emotional discipline means stepping back from the chaos, even when every part of you wants to charge forward. It means allowing yourself to feel deeply without letting those feelings dictate your actions. You don't suppress emotion, you regulate it. That distinction is crucial. Emotional regulation allows you to remain grounded in reality when everything around you feels unstable. It lets you speak with clarity, act with intention, and protect your integrity without losing your center. It's not about being cold or robotic. It's about being wise. To cultivate this discipline, you must first become aware of your emotional triggers. You know what specific words, actions, or dynamics spark your strongest reactions. Then prepare for them. If you know a liberal is likely to spread lies, then expect it. Don't be shocked when it happens. That preparation gives you a mental edge. Instead of falling into the emotional pit they've dug for you, you observe it. You step around it. You think 3 moves ahead. This is psychological warfare, and your calmness is your shield. Mindfulness practices, journaling, breathing techniques, these are not just self-help cliches. They're tactical tools. They help you create space between stimulus and response. That space is where your power lies, and in that space you decide whether to speak or stay silent, whether to correct the narrative or let it collapse under its own contradictions. The narcissist wants you emotionally entangled. They want you to be unpredictable, desperate, reactive, because then you're controllable. But when you remain composed, you become unpredictable to them, and that unnerves them more than anything else. Emotional discipline also extends to how you talk about the situation. Be careful not to vent to everyone or seek validation from those who are already under the liberals' influence. Every conversation becomes a potential liability if you let emotion override discernment. Choose your confidence wisely. Speak from clarity, not from pain. The goal isn't to rally people to your side. That's the liberals' game. Your goal is to act in such a way that your truth becomes undeniable over time. Understand this. Emotional discipline is not about denial or passivity. It's about restraint for a purpose. It's about protecting your energy, conserving your dignity, and playing the long game. You're not giving up the fight. You're just refusing to fight on their terms. That distinction matters. Staying true to your values when a liberal turns people against you is not just a matter of ethics. It's a matter of survival. When your integrity is under attack, it becomes tempting to compromise yourself in an effort to regain approval. Thank you. This is Ron with your tip of the day.
So why are you here, Mr. Clarkson?
Well, because I'm here to support farmers.
Right. Are you angry?
It's difficult to be angry on somebody else's behalf. That's like being... Yes, no, I'm not angry on someone else's behalf.
Right.
Okay, so here is it's a trap. This is a trap, and it's easy to get trapped because the woman sounds sympathetic. Are you angry? She's got a little bit of that in your tone of voice, like she's concerned, right? But it's a trap because what she is trying to do is isolate you in that question. This is a liberal trying to isolate the conservative by making it seem as though they're the only person with an issue with whatever is going on. It's a trap question. So when you recognize this, the thing to do is to change the question. To tell the interviewer that's the wrong question. The right question is this outrageous? Okay, because that's a moral statement. Anger, you could be angry about anything. There's too much mustard on my hot dog. That has nothing to do with morals. But if you ask the question, is this outrageous? Okay, now you're going somewhere. Now you're, as they say, cooking with gas. So listen to your conscience, and when your conscience tells you something's wrong, all you have to do is figure out what is it that's wrong. And once you've done that, then it's very easy to defeat the liberal. And again, this is Ron, your true conservative, with a tip for the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Forward. We have never been more miserable. Despite historic peace and material prosperity, surveys show happiness has declined steadily in the United States over the past half-century. A loneliness epidemic has overshadowed not just the United States, but the entire Western world, and the problem only stands to get worse, as young people report feeling lonely more often and more intensely than any other age group. Marriage rates have plummeted, as have birth rates, which have now fallen below replacement. Each year, abortion claims the lives of 1 million babies in the United States alone. We can no longer even agree on the definitions of man and woman. Saul Alinsky must be looking up from the afterlife with pride. Alinsky's rules for radicals inspired some of the most prominent progressive politicians in recent history, including former President Barack Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, with whom the authors of those rules exchanged gushing letters. The Progressive Training Manual worked, and the results have been hell. Fitting, since Alinsky dedicated his book in part to Lucifer, quote, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, unquote. Can progress breed misery? Chesterton considered progress a useless word, for progress takes for granted an already defined direction. And it is exactly about the direction that we disagree. C.S. Lewis similarly observed, we all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive. Our civilization is dying, spiritually, culturally, and physically of old age. Each year, the problem worsens. The only way forward is back. In the inaugural issue of National Review, William F. Buckley, Jr. defined the conservatives' mission as standing athwart history, yelling, stop, and at a time when no one is inclined to do so. Timothy and David Gordon have more ambitious plans. A conservative might stop at standing, but the retrograde must go further. He cannot content himself with halting the inevitable march of misery-making progress. The retrograde takes a step back, not to relive some dead moment, but to recover something that has been lost. One man's progressive is another man's retrograde, but the categories, whatever you like to call them, are not merely two sides of the same coin. Revering our cultural inheritance requires humility, the beginning of wisdom. Toppling our tradition demands pride, the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins. Where Saul Alinsky enticed his readers to vice, the Gordon brothers encouraged theirs to virtue. President John F. Kennedy explained the difference half a century ago in the words of the socialist playwright George Bernard Shaw. Some see things and say, why? He explained. But I dream things that never were, and I say, why not? Kennedy's brother Robert adopted the line as a slogan for his own presidential campaign. Their other brother Edward quoted it at Robert's funeral, and generations of progressive politicians have parroted the line ever since. What Kennedy failed to mention is the specific origin of the quotation, which appears in Shaw's play Back to Methuselah in the mouth of the serpent, tempting Eve in the Garden of Eden. It is curious how often Satan crops up in the history of so-called progress. Words such as left and right, forward and backward, progress and regress take a political discussion only so far. Eventually, the conversation must come to sin and grace, because, as Cardinal Manning observed, all human conflict is ultimately theological. The only real directions we can go are up to glory or down to perdition. If we hope to survive, we ought to take a step back and work out which way is which. Michael J. Knowles, Los Angeles, California, 20 December 2019.
And that was the foreword to Rules for Retrogrades. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Mossad.
The pen scratched across paper in the quiet study. Abu Jihad leaned over his desk, reviewing coordination documents for the Intifada operations scheduled for the coming week. Outside his window in Sidi Bou Said, the Mediterranean night was still and dark. It was 1:15 in the morning on April 16th, 1988. He didn't hear the phone line being cut outside. He didn't hear the security dog's muffled whimper as it was neutralized. He didn't hear the villa's front door being breached with mechanical precision, the lock mechanism disengaging without a sound loud enough to wake his sleeping children. What he heard finally was footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots, multiple sets, moving with purpose toward the second floor where he sat working. Abu Jihad looked up from his papers. His hand moved instinctively toward the desk drawer where he kept his pistol, but the door to his study was already opening. The suppressed weapons came up first, followed by the commandos holding them. They'd traveled 1,500 miles from Israeli territory for this moment. They'd rehearsed the assault dozens of times in a full-scale replica of this exact room. The first shot hit him in the chest. Now, back to that study in Sidi Bou Said, and the man Israel had decided absolutely had to die. To understand why 8 Israeli commandos were climbing the stairs of a villa in Tunisia at 1:15 in the morning, you need to understand who Abu Jihad was and what he'd built. His real name was Khalil al-Wazir, but everyone in the intelligence world knew him by his nom de guerre, Abu Jihad, father of the struggle. He wasn't just another mid-level operative in Yasser Arafat's PLO. He was the PLO's deputy chief of staff and Fatah's primary military strategist, the man who turned Arafat's political rhetoric into operational violence. The Israelis had been tracking him for over a decade, watching his fingerprints appear on attack after attack. March 1975, the Savoy Hotel raid in Tel Aviv. Palestinian operatives seized the hotel and took hostages. By the time Israeli forces stormed the building, 8 hostages were dead along with 3 soldiers. Abu Jihad had planned every detail of that operation from Beirut, selecting the target and coordinating the assault team's infiltration from the sea. 3 years later came the Coastal Road massacre, and this one made Abu Jihad's name a priority target for Israeli intelligence. March 11th, 1978. 13 Fatah operatives landed on the Israeli coast north of Tel Aviv. They hijacked a bus filled with civilians and opened fire as Israeli forces tried to stop them. When the shooting ended, 37 Israelis were dead. 13 of them were children. Abu Jihad had conceived the operation, selected the landing point, and provided the operational training that made it possible. Israeli intelligence officers studied the attack's planning and recognized something that made Abu Jihad particularly dangerous. He wasn't just ordering attacks, he was thinking strategically about how to maximize psychological impact, how to strike targets that would generate the most fear and political pressure. He understood that terrorism wasn't just about body counts. It was about creating sustained terror that eroded public confidence in the government's ability to protect its citizens. By 1987, Abu Jihad had evolved into something even more threatening. The First Intifada erupted in December of that year, and while it began as spontaneous Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation, Abu Jihad quickly became its primary external coordinator. From his headquarters in Tunis, 1,500 miles from Israeli territory, he organized funding networks, smuggled weapons into the occupied territories, and coordinated the actions of various Palestinian factions. Israeli intelligence intercepted his communications and watched his influence grow. He was turning scattered protests into organized resistance. The Israeli cabinet faced a strategic calculation. Abu Jihad was operating from Tunisia, a sovereign nation with no shared border with Israel. Reaching him would require a deep penetration operation with massive political risk. But his effectiveness was undeniable. Intelligence assessments showed him directing operations that were killing Israeli soldiers and civilians with increasing frequency. His organizational skills had made him Arafat's indispensable deputy, the man who translated political objectives into military action. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir reviewed the intelligence and made his decision. Abu Jihad had to be eliminated. Not arrested, eliminated. The operation would send a message that Israeli reach extended far beyond its borders, that planning attacks from distant capitals wouldn't provide safety, that the men who ordered violence against Israeli civilians would pay the price regardless of where they hid. Mossad received the initial authorization sometime in late 1987. The mandate was clear, but the challenge was enormous. Tunisia wasn't a war zone where Israeli forces operated openly. It was a relatively stable North African nation with its own security services, its own laws, and its own relationship with the international community. Running an assassination operation there meant building an entire intelligence infrastructure from scratch. Surveillance networks, safe houses, cover identities, extraction protocols. Everything would need to be created without alerting Tunisian intelligence or the PLO security teams protecting their leadership. The operation's complexity multiplied when planners recognized they weren't just killing a man. They were killing a man who lived with his wife and children in a residential neighborhood, surrounded by civilians who had nothing to do with the conflict. The hit would need surgical precision, no collateral casualties, no innocent blood that could turn the operation into a propaganda disaster. Just Abu Jihad, eliminated in his home, with his family left physically unharmed even as they witnessed the violence. Israeli military intelligence worked with Mossad to develop the operational plan. They'd need 3 distinct elements working in coordination. First, a long-term surveillance operation to map Abu Jihad's routines and security protocols. Second, a maritime infiltration capability to get the assault team into Tunisia and extract them before Tunisian forces could respond. Third, a deception layer to delay and confuse local security during the critical minutes when the commandos would be most vulnerable. The planners selected Sayeret Matkal for the actual assault. Israel's premier special operations unit had the training and experience for close-quarters combat in residential settings. Shayatet 13, the naval commandos, would handle the maritime infiltration and extraction. Mossad would provide the surveillance infrastructure, the deception operations, and the local intelligence that would make everything else possible. But all of that was theoretical until they could answer one fundamental question. When was Abu Jihad most vulnerable? The answer to that question would take months at least to find, and it would require Mossad operatives to do something they excelled at, becoming invisible in plain sight. Mossad's advance team began entering Tunisia in late 1987, each operative arriving separately with carefully crafted cover identities. One came as a German tourist interested in North African architecture. Another posed as a French NGO worker evaluating development projects. A third arrived as a Belgian business consultant exploring investment opportunities in Tunisia's growing textile sector. Their passports were genuine documents from their cover countries, created through Mossad's sophisticated forgery networks. Their cover stories had enough depth to survive casual scrutiny, real hotel reservations, verifiable business contacts, documented travel histories that placed them in multiple countries before Tunisia. The operational objective was straightforward: find Abu Jihad's residence, establish surveillance, and map every detail of his life until they understood his routines well enough to predict his movements days in advance. The challenge was doing all of this without triggering any alarms from Tunisian security services or the PLO's own protective details. The breakthrough came when a Mossad operative identified an apartment for rent directly across from Abu Jihad's villa in the Sidi Bou Said district. The location was perfect, elevated enough to provide clear sightlines into the villa's windows, close enough to observe details, but not so close that the surveillance itself would seem suspicious. The operative who secured the apartment used a Belgian passport and a cover story about being a freelance writer working on a book about Mediterranean culture. He signed a 6-month lease, paid in cash, and moved in with camera equipment hidden inside tourist luggage. The surveillance operation that followed was meticulous and patient. Every morning, the observation post logged what time lights came on in different rooms. Every evening they noted when Abu Jihad returned home and which rooms he occupied. They tracked the guard rotation schedule. 2 men during the day, 1 at night, the shift change occurring at 6 in the evening and 6 in the morning. They documented the security dog's behavior, noting when it was walked and where it spent most of its time in the compound. Most importantly, they identified Abu Jihad's work pattern. He was a night owl, often staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning working in his second-floor study. The light in that room became the surveillance team's most reliable indicator of his location and activity. They recorded video footage showing him at his desk, surrounded by papers and maps, coordinating the Intifada operations that were his primary focus. One of the Mossad operatives took the cover story to an extreme level that demonstrated the agency's commitment to authenticity. He arrived in Tunis posing as a European man on an extended honeymoon. He brought a female operative who posed as his new wife, and together they played the role of newlyweds exploring North Africa. They stayed in a hotel, visited tourist sites, ate at local restaurants, and behaved exactly like any other couple on a romantic adventure. But their real purpose was to maintain a constant, rotating presence near Abu Jihad's neighborhood without attracting attention. A couple on honeymoon could linger in cafes, take walks at odd hours, and generally exist in public spaces without raising suspicion. The surveillance footage accumulated over weeks and months. Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv reviewed every frame, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities. They noted that Abu Jihad's security was surprisingly light for a man of his importance. The villa had guards, but they weren't particularly alert. The physical security measures were basic: locks on the doors, a perimeter fence, the dog. Nothing that would stop a professional assault team with proper preparation. The most valuable discovery came from watching Abu Jihad's late-night work sessions. Between 1 and 2 in the morning, he was almost always alone in his study. His wife and children were asleep. The guard was often drowsy or distracted. The neighborhood was quiet. Those 60 minutes represented a vulnerability window that Israeli planners could exploit. Back in Israel, military engineers constructed something remarkable: a full-scale replica of Abu Jihad's villa based on the surveillance footage and measurements taken from multiple angles. They built it in a secure location where Sayeret Matkal could rehearse the assault without anyone outside the operation knowing what they were preparing for. The replica included every detail the surveillance team had documented: the layout of the rooms, the position of the furniture, the location of the stairs, even the height of the fence surrounding the property. The assault team ran through the operation again and again, refining their approach with each rehearsal. They practiced breaching the door silently, moving through the ground floor without making noise that would wake the family, climbing the stairs in formation, and entering the study with weapons ready. They timed every movement, looking for ways to shave seconds off their execution. The target time was 3 minutes from breach to withdrawal. Any longer, and they risked encountering response from Tunisian security forces or PLO reinforcements. By early April 1988, the surveillance team in Tunis had logged thousands of hours of observation. They documented Abu Jihad's schedule with enough precision to predict his movements days in advance. They knew which nights he worked late and which nights he went to bed early. They knew when his wife went shopping and when his children came home from school. They'd mapped the neighborhood's traffic patterns, identified the nearest police station, and timed the likely response if someone reported gunfire. On April 10th, the surveillance team noticed something significant. Abu Jihad was spending even more time than usual in his study, working through the night on what appeared to be urgent coordination for Intifada operations. The increased activity suggested he was planning something major, which gave Israeli planners additional justification for moving quickly. Whatever he was organizing, it wouldn't happen if he was eliminated in the next few days. The final operational briefing took place in Tel Aviv on April 14th. Mossad's station chief for the operation laid out the current intelligence picture. Abu Jihad's routine remained consistent. The surveillance post had clear eyes on the villa. The support teams in Tunis were in position with their cover stories intact. Weather forecasts for the Mediterranean showed calm seas, ideal conditions for the naval infiltration. Tunisian security forces showed no signs of heightened alert. Prime Minister Shamir gave the final authorization. The operation would proceed on the night of April 15th, with the assault timed for the early morning hours of April 16th, when Abu Jihad would be working in his study. The Naval Task Force departed from Israeli waters on April 15th, moving northwest toward Tunisia under the cover of a routine patrol. The vessels maintained normal radio traffic and navigation patterns until they approached Tunisian territorial waters, at which point they went dark. No radio transmissions, no active radar, engines throttled down to reduce acoustic signature. By 11:30 that night, they were holding position about 10 kilometers off the Tunisian coast, far enough to remain outside territorial waters, but close enough for the Zodiac boats to reach shore within the operational timeline. At 12:15 in the morning on April 16th, 8 Shayatet 13 commandos climbed into 2 Zodiac inflatable boats and pushed off from the mothership. The Mediterranean was calm, the moon obscured by thin clouds. The Zodiac's engines ran at low throttle to minimize noise as they moved towards the Tunisian coastline. Each commando carried suppressed weapons, communications equipment, and enough ammunition for a sustained firefight if the operation went wrong and they needed to fight their way back to the extraction point. While the naval infiltration was underway, Mossad's ground teams in Tunis were moving into their positions. This was where the operation's deception layer became critical. Israeli intelligence needed to buy time for the assault team to reach the villa, complete the hit, and extract to the beach before Tunisian security forces could respond effectively. The deception plan was elegant and audacious. Mossad operatives would pose as Tunisian police and security personnel, creating fake checkpoints and roadblocks that would delay actual Tunisian forces when they tried to respond to reports of gunfire. The operatives had obtained genuine Tunisian police uniforms through a procurement network that Mossad had spent months developing. They had vehicles that matched Tunisian police specifications, complete with the correct markings and equipment. To a casual observer, or even to a genuine Tunisian officer encountering them at a distance, they would appear completely legitimate. At 12:45 in the morning, a Mossad operative driving a vehicle marked as a telephone maintenance truck pulled up near Abu Jihad's villa. The truck had Tunisian State Telecommunications Company logos on the sides and carried equipment that looked exactly like what a legitimate repair crew would use. The operative got out, opened the back of the truck, and began working on a junction box that controlled phone service to the neighborhood. To anyone watching, he was just a maintenance worker dealing with a service issue. In reality, he was preparing to cut the phone lines that would prevent Abu Jihad or his guards from calling for help. 2 more Mossad operatives in a sedan positioned themselves at an intersection 3 blocks from the villa. They wore plain clothes, but carried identification that identified them as Tunisian internal security officers. Their job was to intercept any civilian vehicles that might stumble into the operational area during the critical minutes of the assault and extraction. They had the authority, or at least the appearance of authority, to redirect traffic and keep curious civilians away from the villa. The most sophisticated element of the deception was something the Tunisian government wouldn't discover until after the operation was over. Idam, the assault team, was carrying an Israeli-made communications jammer, a piece of electronic warfare equipment that could block radio frequencies within a 1-kilometer radius. When activated, the jammer would prevent Tunisian police and security forces from coordinating their response using radios. They'd have to fall back on phone lines, which Mossad was about to cut, or send runners to physically deliver messages, which would burn precious minutes. At 1:05 in the morning, the Zodiacs reached the Tunisian coastline. The commandos had selected a quiet stretch of beach away from populated areas, a location that the surveillance team had identified as having minimal civilian activity even during daytime. At this hour, it was completely deserted. The Zodiac's bows scraped against sand, and the commandos stepped out into shallow water, pulling the boats onto the beach and securing them for the extraction that would happen in less than 30 minutes. The assault team split into 2 groups for the movement inland. 4 commandos took a direct route toward the villa, moving through back streets and staying in shadows. The other 4 took a parallel route that would bring them to the villa's perimeter from a different angle, providing backup and covering the primary team's approach. They moved quickly but carefully, weapons held in low ready positions, eyes scanning for any sign that their infiltration had been detected. At 1:12 in the morning, the assault team reached the villa's perimeter. The guard was standing outside the main entrance, smoking a cigarette. This was the moment the operation could go wrong. If the guard was alert and well-trained, he might notice the commandos approaching and raise an alarm before they could neutralize him. If he managed to fire his weapon or shout a warning, the entire neighborhood would wake up and the assault team would be conducting their hit with potential witnesses watching from windows. The commandos didn't give him the chance. 2 team members moved in from different angles, their suppressed pistols aimed at the guard's center mass. The first shot hit him in the chest before he even registered that something was wrong. He dropped his cigarette and collapsed, dead before his body hit the ground. The suppressed weapon made a sound like a heavy book being dropped on a table. Noticeable if you were standing close by, but not loud enough to wake anyone sleeping inside the villa or in neighboring houses. Simultaneously, another commando moved toward the security dog. The surveillance team had documented the dog's routine. It typically stayed in a kennel near the villa's rear entrance, but sometimes wandered the compound during the night. Tonight, it was in its kennel, and the commando neutralized it with the same clinical efficiency that had killed the guard. The operation required silence and speed. Every potential source of alarm needed to be eliminated before the assault team entered the villa itself. The operative in the telephone maintenance truck chose this moment to cut the phone lines. He'd been watching the villa through binoculars, waiting for the signal from the assault team. When he saw them reach the perimeter, he disconnected the junction box circuits that provided service to Abu Jihad's villa and the surrounding houses. If anyone tried to pick up a phone in the next 30 minutes, they'd hear nothing but dead air. At 1:14 in the morning, the assault team reached the villa's front door. They'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times in the replica back in Israel. The door had a standard lock mechanism, nothing sophisticated enough to require explosives or loud forced entry techniques. One of the commandos used a mechanical lockpick, working quickly while the rest of the team covered him with weapons raised. The lock disengaged with a soft click. The door swung open. They were inside. The ground floor of the villa was dark and quiet. The assault team moved through it in formation, each commando covering a different sector with overlapping fields of fire. Their night vision equipment turned the darkness into shades of green, revealing furniture, doorways, and the staircase leading to the second floor. They knew from the surveillance footage that Abu Jihad's children were sleeping in rooms on the ground floor. The team's rules of engagement were absolute. No harm to the family unless they directly interfered with the mission. The commandos moved past the children's rooms without pausing, focusing on their primary objective, the second-floor study where their target was working. The stairs creaked slightly under their weight. This was unavoidable. The surveillance team had noted this detail during their months of observation, and the assault team knew they had to accept the risk. If Abu Jihad heard the creaking and became suspicious, the commandos would need to move faster than planned. But speed, without precision, could lead to mistakes, and mistakes in a residential hit could mean killing civilians. Abu Jihad heard the footsteps. He looked up from his papers, his expression shifting from concentration to confusion to alarm as he processed what he was hearing. Heavy boots on his stairs at 1:15 in the morning. Multiple people, moving purposefully toward his study. His hand moved toward the desk drawer where he kept his personal weapon, but he was already too late. The men who'd traveled 1,500 miles to kill him had trained for months to execute this moment in under 3 seconds from door breach to confirmed kill. The door to his study burst open. 3 commandos entered simultaneously, their suppressed weapons tracking toward the man sitting at the desk. Abu Jihad's hand was still reaching for the drawer when the first shot hit him in the chest. The suppressed pistol's sound was muffled, but not silent, a sharp crack that echoed in the small room. Abu Jihad jerked backward in his chair, his coordination documents scattering across the desk. The commandos moved closer, firing additional shots to ensure their target was incapacitated and wouldn't be able to fight back or trigger any alarms. The suppressed weapons kept firing, each shot placed with the precision that came from hundreds of hours of training. Abu Jihad slumped in his chair, mortally wounded, his blood spreading across the Intifada planning documents he'd been reviewing moments before. His wife had heard the commotion. She appeared in the hallway outside the study, drawn by the sounds of violence in her home. She saw the commandos, saw her husband dying in his chair, and froze. The commandos turned their weapons toward her but didn't fire. Their rules of engagement held. She wasn't the target. She wasn't armed. She wasn't interfering with the mission. One of the commandos made a sharp hand gesture, indicating she should stay back and remain silent. She complied, too shocked and terrified to do anything else. The assault team leader moved close to Abu Jihad and checked for vital signs. No pulse, no breathing. The target was confirmed dead. The entire assault from door breach to confirmation had taken less than 2 minutes. Now came the most dangerous part of the operation, the withdrawal and extraction, while Tunisian security forces were mobilizing somewhere in the night, confused by cut phone lines and jammed radio frequencies, but beginning to understand that something catastrophic had just happened. The commandos moved back through the villa, retracing their entry route. They passed Abu Jihad's wife, who remained frozen in the hallway, and descended the stairs to the ground floor. The children's rooms remained quiet. Either they'd slept through the suppressed weapons fire, or they were too frightened to leave their rooms. Either way, the assault team had accomplished their mission without killing or injuring any family members. The only casualties were the target, the guard, and the security dog, exactly what the operational plan had specified. Outside, the Mossad perimeter teams were beginning their own withdrawal. The operative in the telephone maintenance truck packed up his equipment and drove away, taking a route that would lead him through a series of safe houses before he eventually left Tunisia on a commercial flight with a European passport that bore no connection to the operation. The two operatives posing as internal security officers dissolved their fake checkpoint and separated, each heading to different safe locations where they'd lay low until they could safely extract from the country. The fake Tunisian police vehicles that had been positioned at strategic intersections also began to scatter. These operatives had been holding positions to delay actual Tunisian security forces if they'd tried to approach the villa during the assault, but with the hit complete and the assault team withdrawing, their mission was finished. They drove off in different directions, some heading to safe houses in Tunis, others driving to other cities where they'd abandon the vehicles and assume new cover identities. At 1:17 in the morning, exactly 3 minutes after entering the villa, the assault team was back outside and moving toward their extraction point. They moved quickly through the dark streets, weapons held ready in case they encountered Tunisian security patrols. The communications jammer was still active, preventing local police from coordinating their response, but the window of protection it provided was limited. The jammer's battery wouldn't last forever, and even with cut phone lines and blocked radio frequencies, Tunisian forces would eventually figure out what was happening and converge on the area. The commandos reached the beach at 1:25 in the morning. The Zodiacs were exactly where they'd been left, secured on the sand and ready for immediate launch. The team pushed the boats into the water and started the engines, no longer worried about noise discipline now that the hit was complete, and speed was more important than stealth. The Zodiacs accelerated away from the Tunisian coast, engines at full throttle, racing toward the mothership waiting in international waters. Behind them, Tunis was beginning to wake up to the reality of what had just happened. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Tunisian police finally arrived at Abu Jihad's villa. The response had been delayed by exactly what Israeli planners had anticipated: cut phone lines, jammed radio frequencies, and fake checkpoints that had confused and redirected the first responders. By the time actual Tunisian security forces reached the scene, the assault team was already 5 kilometers offshore and accelerating toward safety. The police found Abu Jihad's body still in his study chair, surrounded by the Intifada coordination documents he'd been working on when the commandos burst through his door. His wife was in shock, barely able to answer questions about what she'd witnessed. The guard's body was outside, the security dog dead in its kennel. The whole scene spoke to professional execution, a military-style hit conducted with precision and speed that suggested extensive planning and training. Within an hour, word of the assassination was spreading through PLO networks. Someone had killed Abu Jihad, the PLO's deputy chief of staff and Fatah's military strategist, in his home in Tunis. The operation had penetrated 1,500 miles from Israeli territory, breached whatever security measures were supposed to protect PLO leadership in exile, and executed the hit without being caught or leaving anyone alive who could identify the attackers with certainty. Yasser Arafat received the news before dawn and immediately accused Israel of the assassination. He was correct, of course, but Israel had built enough operational ambiguity into the hit that official denial would remain plausible for years. There were no captured commandos to interrogate, no abandoned equipment marked with Israeli military serial numbers, no witnesses who could positively identify the attackers as Israeli special forces. Just a professionally executed assassination that bore all the hallmarks of Israeli intelligence operations, but couldn't be definitively proven.
And that was the Mossad. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.